There are folks who I would call men of words. Michael Harriot is certainly men of words with capital letters, as he has done a lot of things and continues to do a lot of things with words, creating 3D imagery and presenting ideas that you may not like but need to be known. And I appreciate him coming on with me on the podcast this morning. Thank you for coming on, Michael.
And thank you for having me.
And I came to know your work through online on the website The Root, but that doesn't even come close to describing what you've been able to do with words as a career, from journalism to writing your own book to poetry to more. It seems like you enjoy it.
Yes, my mother was a writer, so I've always been interested in words. I grew up with a love of reading and surrounded by books. So I've always been fascinated and intrigued with words, and luckily I've been able to make a career out of it.
Yeah, career out of it, and one that has been informative as well as entertaining. With what you've been able to do, it certainly brings to light many areas that I don't think have been spotlighted enough. I think that's a pretty fair assessment.
Yeah, I think we talk a lot. I write I write a lot about race. And I think we've talked over the years a lot about race, but we've always done it subjectively. And I am, surprisingly, an economist by trade. And so I approach race as an economic construct and try to use data and statistics to explore the subject of race and history and things of that nature. So I think, I don't know if what I'm doing is new, but I think I try to take a different approach to it.
I like to think of some people as three-dimensional thinkers, and we have too many folks these days who are A or B, left or right, up or down, when we need to think in three dimensions. And from what I've been able to read from your work, you seem to do it that way.
Yes, I think, because I don't think there are a lot of arguments are one way or absolute. And most things are shades of gray instead of black and white. And that's the way I try to approach things, in a way, especially the way we think about race and society. And so, a lot of the things that we'll hear from the right side, I actually agree with. I actually agree with family and education is the key to getting ahead. But I also try to show others that family and education, that's not something that people who aren't ahead refrain from trying to do. They believe in family and education as much as others, and I try to show the barriers that prevent those things from being acquired by certain people.
Certainly, and we're seeing it here in Danville, and it's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, other than I think that you're just an interesting person. But we have a situation here in Danville where the economy has taken huge blows over the last several decades, and we have businesses that have left. We have not replaced those businesses. We've gotten an economic situation that you see in many cities where especially minority families, although certainly not 100%, are hit to the point where they start so far behind the starting line that it's tough for them to catch up, and it goes from generation to generation and creates a bigger gap. That's not something we can solve with a snap of a finger.
Right. And I think it's important to recognize that. I think it's important to recognize the historical influences on what we have today. So in any aspect of society, right, when you break a law, that law was written based on things that people have done before. It's called precedent, right?
Right.
And so we look at everything that lands of precedent, whether it's the Constitution, whether it's law, whether it's education. We still teach in the way that we taught in the 1700s, in a classroom with the teacher at the front and a chalkboard and the children sitting in there, because that's the precedent that we have set. But for some reason, when it comes to inequality, when it comes to societal disparities, we don't want to recognize the precedent that has been set and accept that that still influences us today. And those are the things that we have to recognize to change inequality, to change disparity.
I think that's exactly right, and I like that you brought up family early on, because again, there's so many aspects to this that we have to combat. But we've gone from having a nuclear family to what I call a nuclear fallout family, where we deal with what's left. And a lot of times in many of the families around here, and I'm talking across race, and many times across economic strata, we get a matriarch leading several family groups, several family kids, and that makes it extremely tough for anyone in that situation to get that leg up, no matter what is available to them.
Right. I think an important point that we often forget about single-family homes, and we like to think of it as in terms of a father is not present, so you don't have two incomes, a balance of, for instance, discipline and things of that nature. But we also have to remember, again, the precedent of America is that women have been traditionally discriminated against. So when women become the matriarch of a family or several families, they don't have the same opportunities as men do when they lead families, and that also leads to inequality. So sometimes you have the double combination of race and sex, or race and misogyny, that lead to these kinds of inequalities, and that's an important thing to recognize.
We've gotten, unfortunately, to the point in many places where everybody is so afraid of losing what they have that they're not recognizing that other people aren't getting what they deserve. And I don't know where to go with that. I got kind of a Superman complex where I want to flip a switch and say, okay, now everything's equal. We just have too much of a fight for that.
Well, I think that's a big problem, and I think the way to combat that is to show people that a rising tide lifts all boats. Mm-hmm. When we eliminate discrimination, when we eliminate some of these disparities that we've been speaking of, it helps everyone, not just the people who have been discriminated against. It helps the people on the other side of the fence too. When you have a more educated society, you have a better economy. When you have a better economy on all sides, you have less crime. You have and all of that is circular and it ties together. So when you decrease discrimination for people who have been traditionally discriminated against, it helps people who have never experienced discrimination. Also, when more people are employed, you have a bigger tax base. When you have a bigger tax base, you have more money to help the people who have been discriminated against, or to help the more unfortunate. And when you help the more unfortunate, you educate them, when you help them achieve economic gain, then that helps society as a whole. Again, and then it increases your tax, and makes your schools better, and then it continues throughout your society. So it doesn't just help the people who have been discriminated against. It helps everyone. It helps them have a safer, a more productive, and a more affluent society.
And a higher ceiling. Right. I see a lot of kids these days and young people up to their teenage years that have so much disappointment, so much lack of self-esteem, and very little vision around what is outside their front door. While there are opportunities out there, and they don't feel like they are maybe worthy of taking them?
Yeah, I think that's a problem. I think, again, the problem is so multifaceted that there isn't just one thing that you can put a finger at, but we have to have a society. For instance, if someone like me wants to combat racism, and someone else wants to combat mental health, and someone else You know, those things can work in conjunction with each other to make a better society. So it's not one. So there is just one. There isn't just because there is just one problem. The problems are myriad, and we have to take. We need all hands on deck to combat the problems that we face in our society.
Yeah, it really is, and it's just very frustrating. Again, for someone who likes to just get something done, press a button and say we're finished. And that's a lot of things. People say, well, discrimination isn't nearly the problem it was 20 years ago, 50 years ago. Well, it's still there, and it goes from birth or pre-birth in some instances. Once we realize that not everybody is in the same starting block, maybe we can start working with a little more empathy, which I think that we lack completely as a society right now, is the word empathy.
Well, when people say that, I always object to that, right?
Okay.
Because if you look at this pure numbers, right, when we say discrimination is bad as was, since 1950, the black unemployment rate has been higher, has always doubled the white unemployment rate, right?
Right.
But the education gap, there are more people of color, more African Americans who are educated now more than ever. There are more African Americans, fewer African Americans are incarcerated now more than ever, and we're seeing that the incarceration rate for African Americans is decreasing, while the incarceration rate of whites is increasing, and a lot of that is due to the opioid crisis and things of that nature. But we see all of these statistical indicators, the education. We see less criminality, but the unemployment rate hasn't changed. The unemployment gap hasn't changed. The health gap hasn't changed. The achievement gap hasn't changed. The opportunity gap hasn't changed. None of these indicators indicate that blacks are getting closer to equality, even though the things that are in our control have improved, right? And so, in some sense, when you say, well, things are not as bad as they were 50 years ago, I take umbrage with that, because if we have increased education and we have increased decreased high school dropout rate, if we have increased number of black people, we have decreased criminality, but all of the for disparities are still the same, then it seems as if it is getting worse, right?
Right. Yeah, I agree with you. I think that it may, on the surface, to folks like me who come from I was born into a completely white town in the middle of Illinois. Folks like me maybe look at this and say, well, it's got to be much better. Well, it's not so much better as maybe it's got a different face to it. The opportunities are still not there, no matter how much a young person betters themselves for those opportunities, and it really doesn't. It's like a waste of time almost.
And this is not to say that society has not worked to make those things better. Here's an example. This past weekend, I think Friday, was the 55th anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education.
Mm-hmm.
And there are studies that show that schools now are more segregated than they were at the date of the decision of Brown versus Education. There are more black students who attend predominantly African American high schools now than there were when the decision for Brown versus Board of Education was made. Right. Now, how does that affect discrimination, for instance? There was a recent study by Ed Build and the Department of Education that shows, on average, a school with a majority black population, a student body, get, on average, about $1,500 less per student, right? So, on the on the surface, we can say, well, we eliminated school segregation. We desegregated American schools, which is true. We desegregated them legally, right? But the way that America is still constructed, and this gets a lot at what you talk about with Danville, we're still self-segregated. Like, the black communities are still have majority black high schools. And
right.
because they have majority black high schools, they are underfunded. And that's for a myriad of reasons that date back to redlining and even the devaluation of black property in black neighborhoods. So it's a bunch of reasons for that. But it seems as if society has been trying to say, look, let's desegregate schools. But in reality, we're just as segregated as we were 55 years ago.
Yeah, and although I have to give credit to the Danville school system and our local community college, DACC, they have instituted ways now for these people, these kids, to get college credit, and there are some who are actually graduating now out of high school with associate degrees for DACC, which will transfer to larger universities. There are some people who are trying those things, but I don't know why that isn't in every community.
Yeah, I think that's important, and I was talking about that a couple of days ago about how we have to reimagine the education system there to do exactly what you're talking about. When you graduate high school, you should have the equivalent of an associate's degree. You should have a specific skill that you don't have to go into hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt to achieve. Because part of that is part of the education gap, right? Because if African Americans have a wealth gap, then going to school and incurring hundreds of thousands of dollars in college debt increases that disparity because some people can't afford it. Like, the whiter kids can't afford it without going into debt. And so you have black kids coming out of college with a bigger wealth gap than they had going into college, right? And so what's the answer for that? Well, part of the answer might be that you shouldn't have to go to college and incur those hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt if you want to do something that doesn't require that much training, right? So you can get technical training in high school. I could understand if someone wanted to be a lawyer or a doctor, they would have to go to college a number of years. But if you wanted to work in a hospital, if you wanted to work in nursing, for instance, maybe not a registered nurse, but a licensed practical nurse, why couldn't you pick that up in high school and not in present debt? Why couldn't you put yourself on that track in high school to at least get some of those credits out of the way before you have to subject yourself to the debt of college? Some of those things are necessary, and that's how we imagine education to affect the discrimination and the wealth gap.
Now, I agree with you, and DACC here, our Danville Area Community College, is doing a great job. They have technical programs and all sorts of things to try. There are jobs here; they're just technical jobs, and they're doing a great job of being a part of the community. I wish that was more. That was a template that could be used in other communities across the country, but it seems that more and more in some of these communities that the goal line and the crossbars keep getting moved. When someone gets a chance to improve themselves, has a chance of a better lot, now, yes, they get their associate's degree. Yes, they get a bachelor's degree. Now, what they were aiming for is another 3 blocks down. They have to get this degree. They have to already have had their leg up. With this is a sort of casual classism, if not racism, that is it has to be absolutely devastating for a young person these days.
Right. I think, and I think you make a great point, and I think that's part of why we have to reimagine how our society works. Like, we have to reimagine the education system. We have to reimagine things like affirmative action, because we know, for instance, that the K-12 education system is tilted towards wealthier people, right?
Right.
And so if we know this, then we know that it can't be equal going or getting into or applying to college. So we have to find a way to equalize that. And part of the way is what you say about Danville Community College. Our community has to invest in education, and not just in K-12 education. But I would bet that in Danville, or in places where community colleges give opportunity to underprivileged people to show that they want to perform and get an education, those communities prosper. Those communities do better when people can get a college education or an associate's degree without incurring all that debt. And part of that is I think that, for instance, in Oregon, they have this pay it forward program, right? So what they do is if you come out of high school and you go to a state college, right, your tuition is free.
Okay.
And then when you graduate, for a certain amount of time, for a certain amount of years, you have to give 10% or 25% of your income back into that fund, which funds the state college system, which will help more students go to college for free. And see, so really they only have to see that first class of people who are going to college for free, and then the future generations see that money back into the state college system. That is a great way to combat discrimination without necessarily, because a lot of the wealthy fear higher tax. That's a great way to reimagine that system. And so some of those innovative approaches is what we need to make our society more equal.
Oh, I just not even coming close to scratching the surface with you, Michael. That's that type of three-dimensional thinking is something that we definitely need. I appreciate you coming on with me today. I hope we can do it again sometime. For folks who would like to find out more about what you're about, you've got your website up, Michael Harriot website. Where else can they find you?
They can find me writing every day on theroots.com, and all my social media is Michael Harriot, MichaelHarriot.